23rd Eugene Planning Commission meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order. My name is Dan Isaacson, and I'm the chair of the Eugene Planning Commission. To begin this evening, I'd like to call on Commissioner Freckler for the city's land acknowledgement statement. Commissioner Freckler.
Thank you. Since time immemorial, the Kalapuya people have been the indigenous stewards to our region, building dynamic communities, maintaining balance with wildlife, and enacting sustainable land practices. This land acknowledgement is a way of resisting the erasure of indigenous histories and to honor Native communities by inviting truth and reconciliation. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. As we consider the impacts of colonization, we also acknowledge the strength and resiliency of displaced indigenous people. The city of Eugene is built within the traditional homelands known as Kalapuya Ilihi. Kalapuya descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon. They continue to make contributions in our communities here and across the lands. We express our respect for the inherent political sovereignty of all federally recognized tribal nations and indigenous people who live in the state of Oregon and across the nation. Therefore, the Planning Commission recognizes that what we do today will affect the many generations who will come after us.
Thank you, Commissioner Freckler. And thanks to everyone for joining us in this hybrid meeting format. Today, our meeting will begin with public comment, followed by a work session on the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan. There are several housekeeping announcements and instructions related to the meeting format that I need to take care of first. Thank you for your patience while I work my way through them. Anyone wishing to join the meeting online can do so by following the instructions listed on the agenda for this meeting. Planning Commission meetings can also be viewed by watching the live stream available on our website or the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21. For those who join the meeting via computer, device, or phone, your microphone, webcam, and phone are automatically muted when you enter the meeting as an attendee. If you wish to participate during the public comment portion of the meeting and haven't done so already, please raise your virtual hand to join the speaker's queue in one of two ways. For those viewing the meeting on a computer, laptop, or other device, click once on the blue hand icon. For those listening to the meeting on your phone, press *9. Public comment is an opportunity for individuals to speak to the Planning Commission on any topic except for those items scheduled for public hearing or public hearing items for which the record is already closed. As a reminder, your hand must be raised to be in the queue for public comment. Is there anybody in public comment waiting to be recognized? Moving on to our next agenda item, I'd like to turn it over to Terry Harding to begin the staff presentation. Following the staff presentation, the commission will have the opportunity to ask some questions. Terry.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Terry Harding. I'm the principal planner for community planning and design here at the City of Eugene, and I'm also serving as the project manager for this phase of the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan. I'd like to introduce Leo Rausch, who's leading our public involvement for this phase, John Belcher, who serves on the Community Advisory Committee, and Louisa DeHeer, who also serves on the CAC, and Elena Domingo, who is helping with the project, is also here. We have a presentation. We're going to cover where we've been with the project, where we are now, including neighborhood planning elements, community feedback, an update from Leah, and the plan adoption and approval process, and then where we're headed, and then plenty of time for questions and discussion. So where we've been. The neighborhood plan project is divided into 6 phases. Over the spring of 2017 through 2018, the first 3 phases of the project, the reaching out, visioning, and neighborhood priorities phases, focused on asking community members what they value in their neighborhoods now and about their hopes and visions for the future. From 2018 to 2019, the policy development phase focused on drafting policies that relate to the vision and neighborhood priorities. The draft policies are organized under 18 high-level goals. Both the goals and policies were written by the Community Advisory Committee, CAC, and vetted by topic area working groups and the project management team. Summer 2019 to spring 2021, the action planning phase focused on drafting, evaluating, and prioritizing actions, which the community identified as possible strategies to implement the neighborhood plan policies. In May of 2021, the Eugene City Council and Lane County Board of Commissioners directed staff to move into the adoption phase and prepare the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan adoption package for community review. Throughout the project, many groups have helped guide the community outreach and the creation of content. The CAC is an 11-person committee made up of community members nominated by the River Road and Santa Clara community organizations and appointed by you all, the Planning Commission. The CAC plays a key advisory role on the project, and as I mentioned, played the main role in writing the vision statements, goals, policies, and actions. The community organizations are communicating with neighbors, hosting events, and providing hours of volunteer time at events and meetings. The working groups for each topic area played a role vetting and refining the goals, policies, and actions. And the general public was invited to participate and give feedback at each major milestone at a community meeting, typically at North Eugene High School. And we'll hold the final meeting this week on May 25th at North. Finally, the City of Eugene and Lane County staff are staffing the project across multiple departments, and special districts are providing coordination and giving feedback along the way. Here are some of the events and activities that the project team has undertaken over the last 5 years. I'll let you look at those, but suffice it to say that thousands of hours of volunteer time were included in all of these activities. And I'd just like to acknowledge those volunteers now. Thank you for your time. So where are we now? There are 3 main components on the table and out for community feedback right now. There's the neighborhood plan, which itself is will be an adopted land use plan. There's the action plan, which is a catalog of actions to implement over time. And there is a set of neighborhood specific code amendments that will implement certain policies and actions at the time of plan adoption. And I'll go over all 3 of those in a little more detail. Adoption of the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan will provide policy direction to guide plan implementation. The neighborhood plan will serve as an adopted land use plan, implementing statewide planning goals and guidelines at the local level. The plan focuses on 5 topic areas: economic development, transportation, parks and natural resources, land use, and community. Each topic area includes a vision statement, goals, and policies. The neighborhood plan will replace the current River Road Santa Clara Urban Facilities Plan, which was adopted in 1987. The action plan includes community identified actions that are possible strategies to implement the adopted policies. The action plan is not a formally adopted land use plan. Rather, it will guide implementation of the neighborhood plan incrementally over the long term and will require continued coordination between the city, county, River Road, and Santa Clara communities and other community partners, as well as advocacy for additional resources. These next couple of slides provide an example of how a vision statement translates to an action and project on the ground. And as a reminder, there are 5 topic areas. This is just one example. Here on the screen is the Parks and Natural Resources topic area. We've lost our presentation. Okay. And it's back. So the Parks and Natural Resources topic area vision statement is on the screen. It is high level and provides a written description of how the community envisions the area to feel and function in terms of parks and natural resources. Underneath that topic area and vision, there are a number of goals. Goal 8 is to provide neighborhood access to recreational opportunities, parks, and community centers. And you can see the policies nested underneath Goal 8 about parks access, connectivity, and recreational opportunities in community centers. And then in turn, the action plan contains 3 actions under policy 8.3. So 8.3.1, work with the city to preserve Santa Clara Schoolhouse. This is an action that is currently in process. 8.3.2 is to promote the creation of a community center in Santa Clara, and that also is actively underway. 8.3.3 is about providing facilities and programming for all ages and abilities. This is an ongoing action, an example of one that is implemented through agencies on an ongoing basis. This is a picture of the Santa Clara Park Master Plan. It's located next to Madison Middle School out on River Loop 1. And just, it's interesting to note that this site was included in the city's urban growth boundary expansion of 2017. So you can see how long-range planning can consider the needs of a community, bring that property into the urban growth boundary so that it can then be annexed to the city, provided with utilities, and eventually built as a park. The third component is the neighborhood-specific code amendments. This is a set of proposed land use code changes, amending the C2 community commercial zone and the R1 low-density residential zone. There's complete information about this on our website and in the recorded community information session. We go through a little bit more detail about the code amendments and the graphics that accompany them. This slide shows the purpose statements of the code amendments, and the 3 purposes are to implement important land use policies and actions, to promote walkable neighborhoods through pedestrian-friendly building design standards, and to support a shift to less auto-oriented land uses in alignment with citywide climate and transportation goals. As I mentioned, these graphics are available on our website, and they are linked in the survey that's out for community review right now. Illustrated on this slide is a proposal to reduce the allowable building height in the C2 zone within the 2 neighborhoods. The current allowable height is 120 feet, and this proposal would lower that to a maximum of 60 feet. There's also an existing code requirement that says within 50 feet of an R1 residential zone, the maximum height for a commercial building is 30 feet, which is the same height limit as the R1 zone. The other code amendments that are proposed include design standards for those commercially zoned properties, including things like building orientation, building facade requirements, building walls and window coverage so that you don't have a blank wall facing the sidewalk, and weather protection requirements. As I mentioned, there's a list of prohibited auto-oriented uses such as motor vehicle, boat, and RV sales and service. So that means that existing businesses could stay, but if this code amendment is passed, new ones would not be allowed to locate in these 2 neighborhoods in this zone. And that also includes a prohibition on new commercial storage facilities. The proposed amendment to the R1 zone is to allow the display and sale of agricultural products grown off the site as a permitted use. And that's to encourage the collective sale of farm products, which might be grown in several different locations throughout River Road and Santa Clara, but they could be brought together and sold at one single site, subject to some limitations. As you all, I think, have heard, this project and many of our other projects have been through a number of challenges over the last several years. They include the pandemic, staff turnover, and several new state mandates, including the middle housing law, that also known as House Bill 2001 from 2019. That bill applies to all R1 zone land equally in the city of Eugene, which makes some early ideas about the River Road neighborhood plan inconsistent with the new law. There was an early vision to provide a middle housing transition zone between R1 and the corridor, and that became inconsistent with the way the city implemented the middle housing law. Then there was more state legislation about climate-friendly housing, such as compact, close-in, and smaller, more energy-efficient housing options, equitable outcomes, including increased affordability, addressing impacts on historically marginalized communities, and reducing emissions from transportation. And that's known as the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Rulemaking. Leah's leading a good portion of that work, so we can answer questions about that. In addition, removing barriers to housing is a statewide priority like never before. And this affects things as diverse as parking requirements, process requirements, or development standards that increase the cost of providing housing. So in response to all of these new requirements, right, my cursor is, there we go. In response to all of these state requirements, the plan and implementation tools were updated to comply. The visions, goals, and policies, and most of the actions remain largely intact after the 5 years of community work, but some aspects needed to shift. More equitable approach to land use code amendments, the last bullet on the screen, means that the city is responding to this recent state legislation regarding housing production by planning for all parts of the city equally. Instead of writing detailed requirements that apply to one area, we're proposing to be more surgical in our approach. Our code tools are responding to this ever-evolving state landscape that is focusing on addressing the housing crisis and moving us toward more equitable outcomes. Meanwhile, some city projects that are currently underway do align with and connect to the neighborhood plan. A number of transportation and parks projects. I already mentioned Santa Clara Community Park. There's also the West Bank Path, planning and applications for funding for the Ruby Bridge, the pedestrian and bicycle bridge over Beltline that is being planned. A number of code amendments are being proposed in the Willamette River Greenway, and that's going to City Council next month. I mentioned the climate friendly and equitable communities work. There's a comprehensive city website about that project and opportunities to engage on Engage Eugene. And then lastly, upcoming work is just starting on citywide analysis of our urban growth boundary needs for the next update, which is currently due in 2026. So that work will include a look at our tools for encouraging and perhaps incentivizing the kind of compact development that we envision along our corridors and near commercial centers. Okay, it's Leah's turn.
Good evening, commissioners. Thanks for having me again. So all of that really brings us to where we are today. We're really excited to be in the final stages of gathering community feedback before the adoption package is presented to you all later this year. And given the wealth of engagement that the CAC and the community organizations have already done and led since 2017, this period of feedback is really focused on informing community members about the plan and all the work that's already happened, and then asking for kind of final comments, final feedback on the draft materials that are out for review right now. So the graphic on the screen is part of a postcard that dropped in mailboxes in the two neighborhoods just about 2 weeks ago now. And the draft plan and code materials are out for community feedback through the first week of June. Community members were kind of marketing four primary ways for folks to engage. So there's an opportunity to learn about the draft plan, ask questions at 2 virtual information sessions, which Terry talked a little bit about. Those happened last week, but the recording is available to watch online right now. On Thursday, folks have the opportunity to talk with their neighbors and friends about the plan and where it's heading at a community meeting at North Eugene High School. So that's on this Thursday on May 25th. We're providing a meeting toolkit, so an opportunity to gather in smaller groups with friends and neighbors, book clubs, using a meeting toolkit to kind of have a guided conversation, and then sharing feedback through the online survey or the online feedback form, which lives on Engage Eugene, which will be open through June 5th. So a total of about 6 weeks, I think, that it was open. So staff will compile all that feedback through all of those different platforms and share that with the CIC and community organizations in June to inform any final plan revisions and their recommendations, of course, which Terry will talk a little bit more about.
Great, thank you. That leads us to where we're going next and how to stay involved with the plan. So right now we're in the first step of a multi-step process to plan approval and adoption. We're in spring 2023, gathering community feedback. And as Leah just said, the intent of that community feedback is to inform the summer activities when the CAC and community organizations will make their recommendations. And we'll work together with them. We have a project management team that consists of community members and staff that will look at the feedback together and try to get as close to agreement on the next round that goes to you all for your consideration. And that will happen towards the late summer, early fall, when the project moves into the formal process with the planning commissions. Both you all and Lane County will hold work sessions and a public hearing before deliberating and making a recommendation to your elected officials. That process would then begin late fall, early winter, where the city council and board of county commissioners would hold their own work sessions, a second public hearing, and then deliberate and take action separately. And then there's plan implementation, which is the long-term process that happens after the plan is adopted and put in place. So there are multiple opportunities for the public to weigh in. This is the first opportunity to influence the community recommendations. And then groups and individuals are also a critical part of both planning commission and elected officials' decision-making. Everything I just said is now summarized here on this slide. So if you're more of a word person, these are our next steps and target dates. So as Leah said, the survey is going to close on June 5th. And then staff will take all of that, and it kind of depends how much we get. We won't know until we have it, but we'll package it up and talk about it with the Community Advisory Committee. Then they'll move into their recommendations and we'll come out of that process with a revised plan. We'll publish that in the midsummer. And then, as I already said, work through the Planning Commission and elected officials processes. So that is the end of the presentation. And now we have time for questions and discussion for any of the staff or community members that are here with us. Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Bailey.
If it's all right, I have a lot of kind of specific detailed questions from reading through the documents, things that I would just like some clarification on. But first, let me acknowledge the awesome, incredible journey and work and accomplishment that this represents. Having worked in university planning and area plans, I really appreciate what you've done here. And I know it was a lot of people, and I know it's a huge amount of work, and thank you. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you.
In the draft neighborhood plan, you mentioned, it says something about building facade in the design standards, and I did not understand what that specifically is, although something changed to 80 feet, which was a big number.
Mhm.
If you know what I'm referring to and can explain it, I'd appreciate it.
I don't have it in front of me. So there is a requirement that has to do with the length of buildings that is proposed to get more refined in this set of code amendments. There are already, just kind of as a precursor, there's already a number of commercial building requirements in our code. And what's proposed to change here is based on kind of the highlights that have been brought up through the process over the last 5 years. So a little bit of refining and adding pedestrian scale adjustments. So like I said, I don't have it at my fingertips, but that's the intent of adjustments like this that are out on the table for community feedback, is to make sure that buildings are more pedestrian scale. They're broken up, windows are provided, and those sorts of amenities are included.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you talked about in R1, build height is 30 feet, but then it mentions a bonus 7 feet. What is that?
So in our code currently, and this is proposed to remain, there's an additional 7 feet of building height that you can have if you provide a sloped roof. So if the roof is sloped at a particular pitch, the point of the roof can go 7 more feet in the air.
All right.
Yeah.
And here I do have the pages. Pages 11 and 12, you made reference to in the neighborhood plan, to multiple other plans that both inform this and have to be considered in how this moves forward. I would really like to see dates of when those plans, just dates of those plans, and it might change over time. For the Parks and Rec plan, you mentioned it was implemented in 2018, but none of the other plans say
Sure, we can add
when
that.
they came about, or, you know, how long they've been around. And the CIP references a 6-year time frame, and we would want to know when that 6-year began.
Right.
So adding some dates to that would be helpful. Similarly, the draft action plan says draft April 2023. The draft neighborhood plan has no date on it anywhere.
Add that.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'll jump in. I also would like to thank the CAC, members of ARCO, SACO, and staff, volunteers. For some people have been working on this for 20 years, actively for the past 5. You know, they say, you know, you can get pretty darn good at anything you devote 10,000 hours to, and I would imagine there are some people who are getting close to that. So that's really great, and it's really blazing a trail for the formation of the balance between public policy within a city and civic involvement. So that's really great. And there's a lot of opinions on this, and there's a lot of back and forth. And so what I would remind folks who are listening at home to think about is that action plan is the start of the conversation, not the end. If there are things in that document that you really want, when this plan, whatever that takes final form looks like, that is the start of all of community's work to see that council and the respective bodies prioritize that in subsequent budget meetings to make those action items a reality. And specifically to everyone on this side of the table, thank you very much for your work. Commissioner Freckler.
Yeah, so I also wanted to echo Commissioner Isaacson and Bailing's comments, thanking hundreds, if not thousands of hours of volunteer work on the CAC, of the CAC and community members. Thank you very much. I think this project was one of the first I participated in when I joined the Planning Commission. So and that's at least 5 or 6 years ago, but I'm also aware of the fact that this has been going on, I think maybe 30 years or longer. So thank you very much for your work. I do have a question about process around recommendations to the city council, and I'm wondering will we make recommendations on all three pieces individually? I mean, the action plan is, something that is a little bit different than a traditional neighborhood plan in some ways. And is, definitely different than the code amendments, but how will we move those forward as a package, individually?
Great question. So how we're thinking of it right now is, as I mentioned, the neighborhood plan is an adopted land use plan. So it needs a formal recommendation. And, like similar plan amendments and code amendments that you've handled, there are a set of approval criteria. And chiefly it's about conformance with the statewide planning goals and then our own code requirements for updating plans. Same is true for the code amendments. I'm hopping over the action plan for just a second. The code amendments follow a prescribed process in our code, which has opportunity for the Planning Commission to make an official recommendation because they will be formally adopted and placed in our code. The action plan is more like the Parks and Rec plan or a strategic plan. It guides the work of staff and it doesn't require a formal recommendation in the same way because it doesn't function as an adopted policy or code that the city then implements. And I'm looking at Alyssa in case she wants to add anything.
You got it.
Yeah, so we'll be working on when it gets to that phase of work and we're ready for the Planning Commission to make a formal recommendation. We'll have motions and on ordinance and all the pieces laid out for you. And Lauren Summers will be here to guide us and make sure that everything is done correctly.
Okay. I have some questions for our guests. Or is it okay to? Yeah. Oh, okay, great. Well, thanks for being here. So I do have a lot of admiration and respect for the entire process. And, even though we hit that road bump of, 3 years disappeared into the vortex of the pandemic, I'm curious because I've often thought of this as a good model for neighborhoods. So what were some of the, based on your own participation, what were some of the highlights or significant landmarks that you see of the River Road Santa Clara community plan that contributed to it being successful? And then what do you see are the next steps that the CAC or the community can be taking in terms of realizing the vision? Pretty big global, but feel free to take it anywhere.
Nope, it's on.
Thank you, Commissioner Fragla, for that question. I think if we pretended that the pandemic didn't happen, the highlights, I think, of this project were honestly for me, were the receptiveness of city staff to move with the community and respond to our needs and expectations in real time. I think bringing together a large disparate neighborhood, half of whom are not in the city, and connect to folks, meet them where they're at, find opportunities I hosted a barbecue. I had a city planner cook burgers on a grill in my backyard for me so that we could sit and talk about the neighborhood plan with my neighbors, as an opportunity to just connect wherever we could. Bringing together the action working groups to have different meetings in different public buildings or churches around the neighborhood. This was 2019. Gosh, what is time? And those were real highlights for me of getting people engaged in lots and lots of different ways. And I think that momentum, despite its loss during the pandemic and the need to be in little boxes on a TV screen, the effort was still there and the commitment there by city staff. So I have a lot of gratitude for the staff who participated in this, despite also lots of new staff joining during different moments. Moving forward, I would really love for neighborhoods to take that action plan, see where projects are being implemented by the city, that it's in the city's sort of wheelhouse, and where is really the momentum and opportunity for neighbors to get together and take some of those initiatives that we have into our own hands and implement them as neighborhoods, finding, community block grants or where we can take those things that are micro level and move them forward. It's just a roadmap. It's not actually required that we do all of those things, but they're just out there because that's what thousands of neighbors and thousands of hours of volunteers time dictated. So I'm excited for that phase.
Thank you, Commissioner Fraggle and the others for your kind words. It was an amazing outreach process while it lasted. Unfortunately, COVID sort of knocked us off our feet. We were doing a great job. The vision, the goals, the policies and such were moving right along. We had much engagement and we really did lose it due to COVID, and that's unfortunate. What will be interesting to see will be whether people take a look at those visions and the final product and determine whether or not they got embedded in the final product. That's what we should be able to hear from the public, and that's what will be, hopefully, to answer the second part of your question, the two neighborhood associations will be taking that input, reviewing it, making a recommendation to the CAC, which will then take those two recommendations and use those to work with city staff to make a refinement for the CAC proposal, and that's what will come to you. So it's hard to say what that'll bring.
Thank you both.
Commissioner Ramey. Yeah.
I can go next.
Go next. Oh, after me.
Oh, thanks. Just wanted to be sure you saw my hand.
I got this all over there.
Yeah.
So just echoing the other commissioners, thank you all for your work. And it's super important to community building that there are some kinds of moments where the community comes together and agrees on a way to go forward. And that's what this is. What I'm particularly struck by is the way in which Terry described one of the larger goals as being pedestrian friendly. And then you start to see that work its way through the code amendments, and the buildings themselves then are directed to be pedestrian friendly. And but we have to specify that in ways that make them feel that way. So my questions are about those specific code changes. First, a clarification, the transition standards, did those come from the clear and objective work?
They are modeled very heavily on the clear and objective work. I think we had to drop one because it didn't quite match up, and then there were some numbers, but they are more or less modeled on the clear and objective.
Okay, so it would be interesting to know which ones didn't work and which ones did.
Well, I will say in clear and objective, it was about residential next to residential, and this is about commercial next to residential.
Right.
So the height, one of the heights didn't work, and we had to either lower or raise it. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Oh.
And then there was a setback, I think also that didn't quite make sense because of another setback. I'd have to look at them side by side, but it's pretty easy if you do put them side by side to figure out what the differences are.
Okay, now I have a really dumb question. Is residential allowed in commercial zones?
Yes.
So we really are talking about worst case, well, worst case. No, wait a minute, two worst cases, commercial to residential and high density residential to low density residential.
Correct.
Mhm.
Right. So now for the more finicky questions. The drawing here shows a 60-foot allowance, but only 4 stories. It seems like it'd probably be a 5-story building. And so it might be important to illustrate that correctly, so people looking at it can get the sense, because the actual example that was shown somewhere in the literature here was the building that's out on East Amazon, West Amazon. Yeah, that's, I believe, a 6-story building, but it could be a 5-story. I'm not sure. Is it 5?
I think it is 5, and you raise a good point. We have the rest of the graphics do include a picture of the building at Amazon Corner alongside this drawing, but that's a great point. 60 feet could definitely allow 5 stories.
Right. So just, so we're all on the same page there. And then the last one is the one that is the most interesting in a way. How is the 60-foot height picked? How did you pick 60 feet?
Well, to be honest, staff proposed it.
How did you? Fair
Yeah,
enough.
I do have an answer. Over the course of the work, you might remember there was a FTA funded grant,
Mhm.
Federal Transit Administration funded grant to study the corridor, and that work was carried forward in a lot of ways into what is now in the proposed code amendments. So 60 feet has been on the table for quite a while. As to the origin of it, I think it's related to 5 stories. Honestly, the kind of 1 story of commercial and 4 floors of residential that you see in some parts around town.
So that's one filter. That would be what would be a, I suppose, economically viable solution, is one that's 5 stories. Have we vetted that through the development community at all to say, oh no, wait a minute, if you did 62 feet, then this will really sing? Or is there any possibility to do that? Have we heard back from anybody in that realm? Or does the corridor study have that kind of research in it?
It had a team of designers and architects drafting the code and working with the community and then refining it. The next version of the code had a new team of consultants working on it. There was an aspect of that was called code testing.
Yeah.
So that proposal was shopped around through at least a few, but it's a starting point is how I would say it.
Okay.
And we are looking for that feedback. The number might not be exactly right. And if it needs to change, that's something we want to hear.
Right. Well, so now's our chance to do that, because once we get 60 feet and then we have all these, all of a sudden we find out it should have been 68.
Right.
So now's the time if we can somehow get our hands around that. So there are a series of other filters. I mean, pedestrian friendly is one filter you might walk through to say, is 60 the right amount? And that has to do with the width of the street, whether it's going to cast a shadow. What is it like to walk next to a 60-foot tall building? The other criteria have to do with privacy, which I think we get at with the transition angle. And then the last question I have related to this, we're moving the required frontage from, I don't know if it was 20% to 80%. Was it 25? 25. So again, where did that number come from?
Yeah. It was iterative. There was an original proposal from the team that worked on the corridor study that came through to a kind of subcommittee of the CAC. The CAC includes 11 people, as we talked about. One of them is an architect. And so honestly, it may have been Cameron's suggestion in that most recent round of revisions to the standards. And so again, from his experience and his recommendations and living in the neighborhood and what has been heard over the years from the neighbors, that's what was proposed. Yeah, but I don't think there's a magic or a super technical reason.
Well, now's the time to discover what
Yeah,
that is.
Yeah. Okay. I am curious if you have a reaction to it or
I'm only familiar with the other work at nodal development, the mixed use centers where there were standards for facades on, across the setback, but I couldn't tell you what those were, but I know at some point there was some thought given to what those should be.
Yeah.
And the result, what results from that, from applying that. So I think that's all I have. There's another thought. I may have one more I want to sneak in, but I'm going to let Commissioner Beeson jump in at this point.
Please.
Okay, I have a couple of, I guess before I do that, just on that 25% to 80%, my take on, I would be really interested in learning more about that and where it came from and everything you just kind of talked about there. I thought it might, at least one reason might have to do with parking and trying to get parking on the back of a building away from the street as opposed to out front.
Yes.
And not to cite other areas of town, but so I just would be interested in kind of learning more about that. I given that, I mean, I was generally in favor of that one. So for what it's worth, I thought that one made a lot of sense. I also want to say thank you to all of you. I started 4 years ago. I think I was counting them up. I think I've had about 6 meetings on this, and they've all been good. They've all been productive. I've learned a lot. I think it would be really good. I know you're going to do this, but it would be good to keep everybody's shoulder into this and get this thing done. Certainly by the winter of 2024, that would be good. As we've been at it a while. I also have a couple of comments, a couple of things, so I might even need a couple of rounds. I guess kind of my most substantive things, I want to go back to the 60-foot height as a follow-up to Commissioner Ramey. And maybe I could start too with just a brief question on that, as opposed to how did you come up with it? I found myself wondering why, and maybe that's sort of the same question, and I'll put it out there, maybe kind of rhetorical right now. Given everything that's happened in the last few years and everything that's happened in terms of housing and middle housing and all the stuff going on with CFEC, and as I listened to your comments and I've looked at the slides as you sent them out, and and so on, and we talk about compact development, we talk about removing barriers to housing and so on, and I don't want to overstate it, but that one really jumped out at me as we went through it. I don't understand exactly why we back off the 120. We've got C2 zoning around Eugene on various streets that are in a lot of ways similar to River Road. And if you look at River Road, you have those community centers that you've identified where it's generally where the C2 zoning is. And and I'm thinking back to a lot of discussion that happened around the Skinner's Butte Height Amendment, and particularly some of the discussion the council had and proposals for structures downtown. It's 2023, Eugene's getting pretty big, or it's bigger. There is a lot of need for housing. And so where I'm kind of going with this is, I think we should be really cautious picking one area of town and saying the C2, the maximum height for a multi-use building in that zone would be half of wherever else it is in Eugene. I think by going higher, allowing higher buildings, and I'm interested too in hearing from the development community or from contractors or designers on this stuff, but based on some things I think I know about it, I think you're kind of beginning to limit the flexibility of developers to go in and provide multiple units in those areas, where I think collectively as a city, we're looking at those areas and kind of thinking we ought to have more density. That's where the transit is. We ought to have more housing units. We ought to have more places for people to come in. Some of them are going to be they're going to be market rate housing, I'm sure. But as I listened to some of the testimony the other night on the urban development or urban renewal area, there's quite a bit of need for it. So when I look at it, I kind of think, gosh, if you allow 100-foot building or that kind of thing, you're going to have a number of additional housing units on kind of the same footprint, and it's probably going to be more economical to allow that scale. The other thing I would suggest that I kind of did, you're going to think I'm just getting way too obsessive here, but when you go through and you really look at the C2 zoning along River Road and you look at the perimeter properties around it, I'm kind of presuming when you talk about pedestrian friendly, I'm assuming there's, it's pedestrian friendly, but it's also maybe to do with views or something to do with taller buildings or some aversion to the height. A lot of the perimeter property around the C2 zone is not in fact R1. That's kind of fraction of it. A lot of it's public right of way, a lot of it's public space. There's quite a bit there up on the north end in the north of Beltline and the Hunsaker area. There's R2 where the maximum height in those areas is 35-foot building. I just, as you kind of swing around and look at it, you think, yeah, I'm really not sure that you necessarily want to limit to 60 feet. So I'd want to at least put that back out there for the CAC and the staff and people to kind of think about. I know that can be maybe a bit of a hot button issue for different people depending on their perspectives, but I would just, let me, I guess, kind of wrap it up there. I kind of think we should just be careful making changes for one particular area of town to one specific zone like that. I'm going to stop there. I do want another round. I've got a couple of others I want to kind of walk out into a little bit, but I mean, overall, it's very impressive. All of this is just very impressive, and all of the process and the way you set it up in terms of the vision and the goals and the policies and all of the action steps and the way it all kind of hangs together. It's clearly got a lot of thought and a lot of kind of interesting work has gone into it. So thanks.
So just either side want to respond to that?
I'd quickly respond and let John. When we first did our outreach, we asked all our neighbors what were their highest hopes for the neighborhood, and what were their fears of the neighborhood. And we got a lot of feedback from all of our neighbors about the importance of preserving the character of River Road, and especially on River and around the neighborhood, the tree canopy as being really important, and access and view sheds to the river as being really important. The most immediate and passionate feedback we got was what people did not want, which is we do not want West 11th. We do not want Franklin. We do not want Coburg as big shopping centers, parking lots, car-centric places that don't feel safe to walk, that pedestrian-centric neighborhood feel. When we did the feedback with the architecture firm that Terry mentioned, the 10-foot or 10-story buildings were not scalable. There was no economic motive that just wouldn't actually happen. And so having something available as this sort of risk into the future where we don't know what development would look like or the demand will look like in 30 years, but the character of the neighborhood that is vital to people is this feeling of sort of community scale, walkable, active, and connected to the river. And so the idea of a 10-story building going in on River Road was pretty anathema to everyone we talked to. I don't know if you have other thoughts.
Yeah, a few other things. Everything that Louisa said is true. That was the common feedback we got. And to add on to what Louisa said, the feedback from Sarah, their early economic analysis was the most we were likely to see economically developable along the route was 3-story garden apartment type development. So at least in the current world, it's really unlikely we would see anything much bigger than 3 stories. The other thing I would point out, it's a little bit indirect, but one of the things that we argued strongly for you guys about was controlling the scale of the buildings along the Greenway. And there is C2 properties that are in the Greenway, and this would be a roundabout way to control the maximal height of those buildings. Finally, I would say transition standards to a 5-story building or a 6-story building is a lot easier to do than a 10-story building. And my recollection is that if not almost every building around the current C2 is now R1 developed, if not R1 zoned.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm not sure I completely agree. I think it would be good to take. I would just ask, I guess, that the CAC and the staff go back with respect to that and take a good look at the C2 zoning along River Road and what what land and zoning is proximate to it.
One more thing, if I may. There are also C2 zones that are not along River Road, such as along Maxwell, Irving and Irvington. And I think seeing
I saw those.
10-story buildings in those areas would be really a major difference. Again, who knows what the economics would bring.
Yeah, my question was actually about the draft Greenway code and would staff remind me about the relationship again between the Greenway code, the water overlay zone and this draft code. So I'm assuming there's like a hierarchy of which one, or like, how do they all work together?
Right. So we don't have that slide, which I wish we did in this deck, but so the properties along the river probably for the most part have two different sets of regulations. One is the Willamette River is considered a significant statewide planning goal 5 resource. So it has regulations, including a setback and a number of things you cannot do within that setback. That whole area, well, you've seen the map of the Greenway. So there's also the Greenway provisions that require a Greenway permit when anybody is proposing to develop within the boundary of the Greenway. So they will have to meet both the WR overlay zone and the Greenway standards. The Greenway, the clear and objective approval criteria that you all looked at, last month before, that was specific to housing. So if somebody has property in the Greenway and they are proposing housing, we have to provide clear and objective standards for that. So that was the clear and objective path for the Greenway. They also have the optional discretionary path, which continues to apply to commercial and other uses as well. Does that?
Yeah, that does
Okay.
answer my question. So I think for me, I believe that John, if I can call you John rather than Mr. Belcher, I mean, he made a comment about the vision that went into this plan lining up with the final product. And I do believe that is an important evaluation that needs to be made after the feedback is given from the public. So I'm like the entire process, I think, has been remarkable, especially in its persistence and effort. And I think we have a really good product here. But I also want to see what this opportunity for the public to provide feedback on it is. That being said, like I do think it is important to recognize that a lot of the commercial properties that we're talking about are right along the river there, right? And we chose not to address some of those issues around the commercial property in the Greenway draft plan. And I do think that it is a unique characteristic to what we're looking at here with the neighborhood plan. When we think about, and which is part of the reason why these code amendments have come about. So I think we have a good product so far. I want to see what the community responds, and I'm looking forward to hearing that feedback.
I'm going to jump in as well real quick on outreach. One of the critiques that I've had in this process is that when you are just having SACO, ARCO, CAC, the demographics of those groups and the people that we would necessarily be connected to, and full disclosure, I'm co-chair of ARCO. You know, it can get a little siloed, right? So now that we're into public comment period, I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about what the outreach plan is to have the outreach response be more reflective of the neighborhood that we're creating a plan for. For example, 40% of the River Road and respectively about the same in Santa Clara renters. So most of our groups are not. So it's arguably accurate to state that the priorities and what would be in one plan would be might be different. So that's something I would be looking for. We have plenty of very large apartment and rentals in along River Road to do a host meeting at, and really kind of target those door-to-door knocking to have that feedback generated from. But that would be where I'd start. I'd like to hear all of everyone's thoughts.
Great point. And it's a really big topic. As you might remember, in the beginning, the first 3 phases of work, there was not only community organization-led outreach, but targeted outreach to renters, low-income, and Latinx community members to try to reach folks that we weren't reaching through typical outreach methods. That work was summarized in an outreach report, and I think we were just looking at it today. 2019 was the date of that report. There were several phases. Anyway, what I'm getting at is that we collected demographic information from those surveys and from focus groups and the targeted outreach. And that was fed into the product that we have now. So there is that component. And the point you're making now about the need to get a diversity of voices to weigh in on the plan is very important. And I would welcome thoughts about that. I think we're doing what we can online and with the tools that we have. I believe we also are collecting demographic information in the current survey. So we'll have that information. But if there are places that we can go, meet people where they are and try to increase that, I think that's a really good idea.
It's hard to have pop-up public policy, but if we can thread that needle, it'd be important.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, John, go ahead.
I do believe Engage Eugene does ask questions about demographics. They're all voluntary, however, so I don't know how much we'll get. It's a good point. Generally, neighborhood associations or homeowner involved. I do think the demographics of renters in River Road and Santa Clara is they're more likely to be in single family homes than they are in the few rental facilities we do have, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't try to do some outreach somehow.
Yeah, I'll just add, so I mentioned the postcard that dropped a couple weeks ago, and that did go to all residents. And the couple information sessions that we hosted last week, I think the majority of the folks on, I know at least the second one, a CAC member asked folks, and almost everyone was new to the process. So we do know that was one method that we have to kind of reach new folks. I think it's important, to Terry's point, of all of the engagement that's happened over the last 5 or 6 years, to recognize all that work, and that when you're at the final stage, when we have a draft plan that people are reacting to, we're looking at a different type of engagement, right? We're not doing the deep visioning work at this stage. And so it is harder, I would say, to bring people in, because they're like, it's a draft plan. What do you want me to do? Read this 70-page plan and tell you, right? So it's a little hard to bring in new people at this point, but I think we're doing what we can based on where we are in the process, but definitely open to the feedback. And I agree, renters are a good group for us to continue to target.
Next.
Have we considered reaching out to CETA?
Yeah, so the Springfield Eugene Tenants Association is on our list of interested parties. They get all our mailings. They participated in early focus group type meetings, but excellent suggestion to do some personalized outreach to organizations at this point.
Great, thank you.
Did you have
Yeah, one other thing, I think it's going to be important for us to look at what kind of feedback, the volume, not the volume, but the number of people who provide feedback in general. If we get to June 5th and we have 30 people responding, I think we have to look at that. But I have no idea how it's going.
Commissioner Ramey.
So again, I want to commend the sort of why you've been able to stick with this process for so long and track the ideals from the beginning. And I think if we think about the vision that was originally proposed, if we think about testing that vision, now we're testing it with code amendments, but we also need to be sure those code amendments have been run through some other filter, because I get that C2 means something different in a different geographic location in the city. But it's the only tool we have citywide. So that's why you might treat C2 differently in some places than you do others. And that's why, back to Commissioner Fragala's original questions about what can we model other neighborhood plans after this process? Because that's a good example. I mean, the C2 is just spread like peanut butter all over the place, but it's really not the same. Every part of the city has a different sort of vision of how that's going to work. So I think we can amend it, but I would sure like to see it based on an overall vision with some policy ideas about, well, this is why we're going from, well, no, forget about 120. I mean, 120 was probably arbitrary. We picked 60 because that's the sentence I want to see. It doesn't really matter to me that it was 120, because I'm sure another group of people sat around and said we picked 120 because, and who knows what that was. But at least when I'm involved, I'd like to know what that is. And then lastly, I don't suppose we have an alternative path in this, do we? So if you want to be 62 for some reason, is there an alternative path you can go down?
Question, as the previous work had proposed a 60-foot height limit with a bonus for affordable housing and basically another floor. But then a new state law passed.
There is a new state law that does have a height bonus for affordable housing. I can't remember exactly which zone it applies to, but that's something we can get back to you on. I think we didn't include it because it matches up with the state law, but we can get you more information on that.
So currently, if you wanted to get, let's say this goes forward, and there's some reason why this project can only cover 70% of the setback. Is there what's the process that one goes through for that?
Oh, instead of
adjustment review?
Frontage.
Yeah,
Yes, adjustment review.
Yeah, there are adjustment reviews for some of those design standards in there, including that particular one.
And I'm sorry, I guess this probably every time this comes up, but what are the criteria that are used when judging whether an adjustment review is appropriate?
It depends on what the adjustment is requesting.
Okay.
And I don't know those off.
The answer I want is it depends on the area that is affected and the plan that oversees that area. Because if the plan says we want to be 80% for these reasons, and you come in for adjustment review and we can meet all those reasons, but we can only be 77, then it's easy for you all to go, okay, that means it met all the intended, it doesn't catch shadows. It's whatever those original ideas were. It's pedestrian friendly, but you have to be more specific than that, I get. But I think that helps you. It helps the developer understand where did this come from? And if I meet all these other standards, but I can only be 72%, am I done? Or is there a process I can go through?
Right.
Commissioner Beeson?
I have another one. I guess what I want to do maybe as a bit of a preamble. I appreciate where we are. I think I understand where we are in the process, and we've been at this, as we have all remarked, for quite a while. We are at this point reviewing it. We're giving some feedback back to you guys and back to the staff, and that's going to be coupled up with what comes in from the community. And then we're going to go into a more formal, I guess, planning commission process. And there'll be a public hearing there. And I too am very interested in, hearing what the public has to say. And I don't want to prejudge any of that. So, and I also appreciate that around town, there'll be different perspectives on what a C2, what kind of criteria you might use to design for whatever it is that's going to go into C2. And I get that. So there was some other things that kind of, again, jumped out at me, and I'm offering them up kind of in the spirit of where we are in the process, and that maybe just to kind of have some discussion and put it out there and see kind of what was going on as people thought about these things. I will say as I go through the process, I try to find consensus with my colleagues as we reach a point after the public hearing and making a recommendation to the council. I want to be, you know, as best I can, kind of part of that. So the other thing that kind of jumped at me a bit is in there you have prohibited uses. You knew where I was going to go. That you had prohibited uses for different, and it was, I think in the AIS in the text, it was called out as automobile related services. And the way I read it, I mean, the way it kind of says, and I understand, I guess if you have some existing auto related businesses, they're going to be able to stay there, but you don't want anything new. And so that'd be cars and tires and all of that stuff. And I guess I found myself kind of pushing back against that. It seems like I realize we're doing a neighborhood plan, and neighborhoods are unique, and neighborhoods collectively make up a city, but we're still a city. And I'm thinking there's what, 25,000 people who live in the two neighborhoods. So it just struck me that in C2 zoned area, to say that you wouldn't have automobile related services anymore, any more of them. I was struggling with that a little bit. I think understand why you might have said it. Maybe I will let you talk to me about why, but I sort of think that as you have C2 around the city or some kind of commercial zones, that having services that relate to the needs of the people who live in the city is like okay and makes some sense. I personally would like to see as we move forward, there'd be less automobiles and more, you know, more efficient forms of transit. But so I guess I just find myself kind of struggling with that a little bit, how you took all those exceptions in there. Can you talk about that a bit?
Sure, I'll share a bit. So one of the, again, going all the way back to the very beginning of the visioning exercises we did with neighbors over many public meetings, particular adjectives popped out about what people wanted in the neighborhood. And it was active and vibrant and walkable. River Road sort of functions like a one street town where you have one street of commercial and then everybody else is out sometimes up to a mile from River Road itself. So we don't have any commercial development in the neighborhood. It's sort of, you have to get to River Road. And so when you get to River Road, you want things that you can do there. Storage facilities don't do anything for anybody that you wouldn't want to walk by them, that you wouldn't want to engage with them. You can't go buy a coffee in a storage facility. And a car-centric lots and lots of current uses of River Road are car-oriented. They're basically parked cars that are sold, sometimes maybe online. And so it's essentially a parking lot. It's not active. It's not bringing people to walk and enjoy that area. And it's moving cars in and out of that area at a higher speed. And safety was the other huge concern of our neighbors. And River Road we've reduced the speed on River Road, but it's still a major transit corridor. And so bringing folks from other parts of the city for car-oriented things limits our ability to pedestrianize and bike orient those limited lots that we have to work with in the neighborhood. And so having new businesses come in that also want to park cars or service cars, there's noise pollution questions, there's safety questions about moving vehicles, and then there's just another lot that isn't available for active and vibrant uses that our neighbors have asked for.
Thank you.
So when we had a special area zone, which is no longer in the plan, one of the things we did attempt to prohibit was drive-through facilities such as restaurants and such. That's not there. So I guess you can say we've lost that intent through the process. Mm-hmm. There are an awful lot of existing car-centric uses along River Road. If you drive down there, there's used car dealerships, there's repair dealerships, there's detailing facilities, et cetera. And I think the perception is that we're saturated. We've got what we need and we just don't want to see any more. Those are the two things I would say. And I would agree with Louisa that the only time you go to a storage facility is either to put something in or to take something out. And that's the only purpose they serve. And we've got a lot of those too. So we think we have enough.
Commissioner Bailey.
I just wanted to ask that somewhere in the introduction or the history, that you add some reference to the population and the number of households. You did have numbers of acres, but that doesn't give us a perspective of how many people are we talking about. And it would be helpful to know that information also as a percentage of the total population.
Great,
thanks.
I'll jump in one last time, and it's just more of a comment. I really don't want to make this into a discussion. I don't think it would probably be very productive, but there's obviously 23 neighborhoods that make up Eugene. And theoretically, we're going to do this 22 more times on different neighborhood plans that we kind of create. So some version of you two folks will be here presenting to a new planning commission at some point on a new neighborhood plan after their hopefully less than 5 years worth of work to get to that point. I think it's important with any project. I know I do it in my business world to do essentially an autopsy on what worked and what didn't. And I don't think we need to spend time to going over that now, but I think it's important that both sides, from the city side to the community involvement side, keep a list of what worked really well, both in process and ultimate outcome, as well as from the city side, and have an after meeting when this is all over with to go review that, so that when the next one comes up, that when you hand the baton to the next neighborhood and you go to the next neighborhood, you're able to say, this is what worked, this is where we can improve, and this is what we're going to improve, so that the future planning commission, whomever that serves, can ask you, what did you learn from the last one? What improvements have you made? I think that would be really helpful.
I would just note that that recommendation is in the plan.
Oh, well, there you go.
There's a policy that recommends or that proposes ongoing monitoring of the plan and the success of the policies. And there's also a commitment to hold an annual coordination meeting between city staff from multiple departments, county staff, and the community organizations to really check in on the action plan and priorities, so that we can be aligned as much as possible and be looking for grant opportunities or communication opportunities to really advance more things than just the code amendments. That's just the beginning.
Awesome. Anybody else have any other comments?
I do.
Commissioner Beast.
Is that all right?
No, absolutely, please.
Just checking. Those were my two hard ones already. So let me, a couple of things, a very specific one, and this the visible transmittance criteria. I looked up visible transmittance that had to do basically with it had to do with windows and what you could see through versus not. And but my main question is, what is that? Why is that in there? And what does that relate to in terms of the kind of development we're talking about along River Road?
In the transition?
No.
It's actually along the street front.
Yeah, it's along the
It's
street
so that
frontage.
somebody doesn't put in a window and then either cover it up or make it so dark that you can't see through it. So there needs to be some visibility through the window. And we don't actually have our expert here to be able to give you more information on that. So that's my high level answer, because we have had folks that will, put in a window, but then put that sun stuff behind, I don't know what it's called, put something behind it so you can't really see through. And then you lose the vibrant and that, the active street frontage, because then it's really, you just have a wall again, because you can't, there's no visibility.
Oh, that's where
Right.
I was not getting it. Okay. I kind of got the idea that you can see through to some degree or not. but, okay. I have another one. This is maybe more of a comment. I was intrigued by, in the residential code, the amendment to allow agricultural goods to be assembled, I guess, and sold in residential areas. I thought that was pretty interesting, and I think I may know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it or put it out there anyway. That struck me as something that would be pretty cool in various parts of our city. And I'm not going to sit here and cite them, but I can think of places, having lived here a while, where people would probably kind of like that. Is that at all possible, or do we have to go through some other really long process? Or can you...
It's not impossible. I mean, the code could be written differently. The reason that it's written specific to River Road is kind of twofold. One, we're this is working to implement this plan, and they are, I think, self-proclaimed the garden district. I can't remember. River and Garden District. Right. And if you look at the soils map, man, do they have nice soils out there. So, and we know that there are, large lots, a fair amount of agricultural uses. Anybody in the city can sell produce or agricultural products on their own property that they produce. So if you grow flowers, you can sell those on your property. What this is specifically allowing is that collective.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, and so I think this gives us that opportunity to test it out as well.
Okay.
And so we don't have this, if we didn't hit the mark on this, on the way the code is written, we could have a proliferation of commercial uses citywide that we didn't intend. And so this really gives us an opportunity to test it out as well. And then if it's working, then we can replicate, actually just change it so it's not specific to those two neighborhoods, but that it's citywide.
Well, I think it's a very cool thing to
I add one thing is that Santa Clara neighborhood actually extends beyond the urban growth boundary. So it includes working farms. And so one of which is on our community advisory committee. And so having that recognize the significance of agriculture to the economy and the culture of Santa Clara was really important.
Well, that's good. And a lot of that, I will tell you, a lot of that came through, I think, pretty clearly as I went through the material. It was more just thinking about what it might take to extend that into some other areas, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Thank you all for this great feedback. I just want to kind of sum up by saying this is an opportunity to learn about what's in the draft, focus on questions and ideas to put on the table. Thank you for doing that, because we all have open ears at this point, and the time for Planning Commission to really dig in and respond to everything is coming next. So at this point, we're really hoping to get as much community feedback as possible to help strengthen the plan and inform the community recommendations. So that's where we are, and that's what you'll hear next is what we heard from the community.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Cass.
Yeah, it's good to hear what you thought today. Thank you.
Well, next on our agenda is items from staff and other commissioners.
Oh, okay. Commissioner Lear is on the meeting and he had a question.
I guess some technical difficulty.
Okay.
Okay, I'm just going to read it out. So following up on Commissioner Isaacson's comment, to what extent will this process be reproduced for other neighborhoods? What is the timeline like for this?
Great question, Commissioner Lear. We're in a bit of a shift in the way that this project has gone. I've mentioned repeatedly the number of state mandates that have come down since we started the project. And so some of those answers are not known yet, frankly. Alyssa was just at a city council meeting last month going over the planning team's work plan and the whole department's work plan and what's in front of us. And there are 2 other neighborhoods in the queue, but the timing is not solidified yet. And so we know that we'll be doing additional neighborhood planning, but we really have a lot of citywide work to get finished first. And then we need to take some lessons learned from this process and apply those to what we do next with neighborhood planning. Nothing to add? Okay.
Melissa, do you have something from staff?
The only thing I have to add is that you get 2 meetings in June that are proposed to be on the climate friendly and equitable communities rulemaking for parking. So that should be exciting. The first one's mostly on public outreach. And then later in the month, it's public hearing, which means most of July will be deliberations. And I know we polled you in the last couple of weeks and we're kind of finalizing that schedule and we'll hope to have that out to you by the end of the week. And then just council is having their public hearing on the Greenway Code Amendments on June 20th. They had their work session last week, week before. This month. And that actually went really well. I think it was really helpful for them just to get the kind of the foundation of that. And then just the other big thing that's going on right now is the city's budget, forecasting a $2 million deficit over the next 2 years. So tomorrow night, the budget committee has their public hearing and deliberations. And then on June 26th is the council public hearing and deliberations. So they will be having some difficult conversations.
Melissa, I think you meant 20 million.
Oh, did I say, what did I say?
2.
Oh, 2. I meant 20 million over 2 years.
Wonderful.
Yeah, sorry.
Good news.
I'll take your number.
You know, 2 million sounds great
Good
compared
job.
to that. Thank you for catching that, Terry.
Okay, another commissioner earlier.
Sorry. Okay, so back to neighborhood planning for a moment. Do we need to move faster in the future given the pace of state law change?
Slower.
A good question. We do stay pretty involved and track what's going on at the legislature. It is all about housing. And so I would say that that continues to be the focus of the legislature as far as its impact to our work. And we're constantly trying to stay ahead of it, figure out what it means for us. The next big project really is about our land supply and updating the urban growth boundary. And so that's a citywide project. It will kind of shape how we do future neighborhood planning because that will need to follow the implementation of that citywide project. So definitely more to come as we are able to tackle each of those things.
Anything from other commissioners? Okay. Well, this meeting of the Planning Commission is now adjourned.
Thank you.